I will try to get through this. We've been studying Mark, many chapters, and here we are. We're to the time of Jesus has been telling his disciples about the plan, the final part of the plan. And y'all been with us and been listening to Shane and Ed as we've gone through the book of Mark. And last week, I'm going to kind of pick up where we stopped last week, if you don't mind. Just bear with me. We're going to read through it because it just starting where we left and getting to the cross is a lot in there. So let's just read through it if you don't mind. Last week, Jesus was struggling in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was actually struggling with the plan. The disciples didn't like it, him telling them about it. Well, Jesus was struggling as well. So I'm reading from the NLT instead of the CSV, and this is just my Bible. This is what I use. So we're going to pick up here in verse 43 of 14. And any time, please, y'all speak up. Please interrupt me. Speak up if you see something I don't see, or you want to say something. By all means, you're not going to interrupt me. I promise. All right. So verse 43 of chapter 14. And immediately, even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests, the teachers of the religious law, and the elders. The traitor Judas had given them a prearranged signal. You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. Then you can take him away under guard. And as soon as they arrived, Judas walked up to Jesus and said, Rabbi, he exclaimed, and gave him a kiss. Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. So Jesus asked him, Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there among you teaching every day, but these things are happening to fulfill what the scriptures say about me. That just hit me pretty hard, right? I mean, you've been with me this whole time. You've wanted my healings and my teachings, and here you are coming to arrest me. Why didn't you have this feeling when I was doing all the miracles that you were asking? So, verse 50 says, Then all the disciples deserted him and ran away. That right there, I circled that, right? They've been following him. And once they come to arrest him, the disciples ran away. It says, a young man following behind was clothed only in a long linen shirt. And when the mob tried to grab him, he slipped out of his shirt and ran away naked. Then they took Jesus to the high priest's home, where the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers and the religious law had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed at a distance and went right into the high priest's courtyard. There he sat with the guards, warming himself by a fire. So all the disciples had ran away. Well, Peter kind of just held back a little bit and followed behind him, right? It only mentions him doing that. These are just some things I highlighted when I was reading. Since inside, the leading priest and the entire high council were trying to find evidence against Jesus, so they could not put him to death, but they couldn't find any. Many false witnesses spoke against him, but they contradicted each other. Finally, some men stood up and gave a false testimony. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands in 3 days. I will build another made without human hands. But even then, they didn't get their story straight. They were still, they were just trying to come up with something. They couldn't even say the same thing to even get any one good, bad thing against him. I would say good, bad thing, kind of contradicting each other, but they couldn't even find one thing against him. But I will try to, Shane spoke on this before about the numbers and how it all works out, but, right there again, he'll tear it down in 3 days and he'll build it back in 3 days. That 3 will keep coming up as we keep going. Verse 60 says, Then the high priest stood up before the others and asked Jesus, Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself? But Jesus was silent and made no reply. Then the high priest asked him, Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven. So right there again, it's at the end, but he's still telling them, hey, this is what's going to happen. You're going to see it. He knows death is coming, the crucifixion is coming, but he's speaking of the resurrection right here again. It says, Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard this blasphemy. What is your verdict? Guilty, they cried. He deserves to die. Then some of them began to spit on him, and they blindfolded him and beat him with their fists. Prophecy to us, they jeered, and the guards slapped him as they took him away. So at the bottom in my Bible, it gives me kind of a summary of some verses. I'm going to read this. It says, Jesus himself endured injustice. He was lied about, falsely accused, convicted, and physically tortured. But instead of returning words or blows in kind, he entrusted himself to his Father's care. Jesus thus modeled the kind of trust in God that we should have when we are being treated unjustly. As we experience pain that comes from persecution, physical harm, injustice, or the sins others commit against us, we will feel violated. It is normal to feel angry, sorrowful, or fearful, and to host painful emotions against it, but we are not to hold these. Rather, we are to feel them and release them to God. As we surrender injustice, we endure to God. He can take vengeance where vengeance is due. That was just a little summary at the bottom. Jesus went through all this stuff, and he just took it. Like he trusted his Father's plan. And when we're going through some stuff, we should just trust God to take care of it. Even as simple as being nervous and getting up here. I had to tell myself in the way here, I'm like, just do it. Trust God's going to give you the right thing to say of some way, somehow. We need to trust him all the time in everything. All right, verse 66. Meanwhile, Peter was in the courtyard below, and one of the servant girls who worked for the high priest came by and noticed Peter warming himself by the fire. And she looked at him closely and said, You were one of those with Jesus of Nazareth. But Peter denied it. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. He went out into the entryway. Just then a rooster crowed. When the servant girl saw him standing there, she began telling the others, This man is definitely one of them. But Peter denied it again. A little later, some of the other bystanders confronted Peter and said, You must be one of them because you are a Galilean. Peter swore, A curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know this man you're talking about. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And suddenly Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. And before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. That you even know me. And he broke down and wept. So I didn't want to leave all that out, right? We're picking up where we left last week. We've not even gotten to this week's verses yet, but I didn't want to leave any of this out. Peter, bless his heart. He Yes. Yes.
A lot of people think that was Mark.
Really?
And that because he's writing this story, he put himself in the story but didn't name himself. Because he was real young.
Yeah.
So he followed him around all the time. And Peter, the same people would think that Peter is the one that told Mark this whole story. And if he's the one that ran away, he would have to have a witness in some other way than Peter. So that would explain, Peter telling him all these things.
Yep.
What's strange though is Peter tells on himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
He tells his faults.
Yeah. He didn't try to deny it. I mean, he's saying right here how bad he had done. Right.
Shows his repentance. That he can't
Yeah.
touch you by that point.
What part of the rooster crow, is that just an alive being told? What does that symbolize?
Jesus, Jesus told Peter, "You'll deny me 3 times before the rooster crows twice," and they kind of brushed it off, right? And no, I would never do that. And here it is, But the last part of that chapter 14, it says, "And Peter broke down and wept," and can't imagine, but I can't imagine. I don't feel humble to be right. I don't feel worthy of being right here. So chapter 15, we'll start that. It says, "Very early in the morning, the leading priests and elders and the teachers of the Jewish law, the entire high council, met to discuss the next step. They bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate asked Jesus, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And Jesus replied, 'You have said it.'" Now, what does y'all's translation say right there? Does it say the same thing on verse 2?
It is as you say.
It is as you use, okay. It says, "Then the leading priests kept accusing him of many crimes, and Pilate asked him, 'Aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they are bringing against you?' But Jesus said nothing, much to Pilate's surprise. Now it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner, anyone the people requested. One of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas, a revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising. The crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release a prisoner as usual. Pilate asked, "Would you like me to release the king of the Jews?" he asked. In parentheses, this has, for he realized by now that the leading priest had arrested Jesus out of envy. I don't know what y'all's Bible has. Mine has that in parentheses right there. It says, "But at this point, the leading priests stirred up the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. Pilate asked them, 'Then what should I do with this man you call the king of the Jews?' And they shouted back, 'Crucify him.' 'Why?' Pilate demanded. 'What crime has he committed?' But the mob roared even louder, 'Crucify him.' So to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. So there again, I got some summary at the bottom that I'm going to read on those verses. It says, Pilate stated at least 3 times that he found no guilt in Jesus, yet he handed Jesus over for execution. Strong emotions on the part of the Jews and Pilate's desire to pacify them at all costs led to the punishment of an innocent man. We have a lot in common with Pilate. We often sacrifice the truth in order to please the crowd. Our challenge is to stand firm in our faith and not succumb to the world's sinful demands. Right? Did y'all get all that right there? Sometimes we just to fit in with the crowd, right? We'll push off what we know is right. Maybe I'm the only guilty. I don't know, but I read that, and I'm going to read that today while I'm going through it. So we're getting close, y'all, to the actual crucifixion itself. Verse 16, the soldiers took Jesus into the courtyard by the governor's headquarters and called out the entire raiment. They dressed him in a purple robe, and they wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head. And then they saluted him and taunted him, "Hail, King of Jews!" And they struck him on the head with a reed stick and spit on him, and he dropped to their they dropped to their knees in mock of actual worship. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the purple robe and put his crown, his own clothes on him again, and then they led him away to be crucified. I don't know that I had ever read that part of it right there, right where they put him in a purple robe and actually mocked the worshiping of him as a king. That part, I'll be honest with you, I hadn't read that much before. But by this time he's weak. I mean, they've already beat on him. He's very weak.
One thing real quick, talking about purple robe, doesn't really mention it, but they put it on after he already been hurt. And what happened is he started to feel through the robe, blood coagulating.
Oh, yeah.
Then they rip it right back off and open it all back up again.
Yeah.
I had a class in high school, and that was one of the things that we talked about, because I never really paid attention to it.
You don't think about that, but that's probably true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what he went through, I don't think any of us can comprehend what happened or how much suffering was there. None of us can. That's why I don't even feel right to do this lesson. I know I don't. There's no way we can understand what he went through. We read it, but So I don't do as good as everybody else does with teaching, but I did read a little bit of the quarterly here, the teacher's quarterly. It said to ask y'all this morning to just be in a set of sandals that was there to see this. Put your feet in a set of sandals to be there and see this crucifixion and what he went through. And we can't imagine the suffering that was done just for me. For me, for you.
I saw this video. It was like the physiology of everything they did to him. And as a nurse, I don't know. We would not be able to survive that. No, we probably wouldn't even have made it through like a third of what he went through. We wouldn't have even made it through this part, because at this point he was in like shock from losing so much blood, and the pain is on like a whole nother, like this is past like childbirth pain, way past that. So that video is just hard to watch. But
And he doesn't even say nothing. When they ask him, he doesn't even say nothing. He's not complaining. I mean, it was his father's plan, and he knew it. And he, phew.
Like when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane or whatever, he was praying to God. And he was praying so fervently or whatever, he was sweating, blood drops were coming out.
Mhm.
That's just hard to even imagine.
Yeah.
When I was reading that, I was trying to fathom, what he was going through. He knew what was going to happen, but
Yeah, it is. That's why, like I said, when I was asked to do this and speak on it, we can't fathom what he was dealing with.
the best way was probably some of the movies and shows. I know one night I was watching a movie there, and I don't remember the name. It was called Jesus or what it was called. But anyway, when they were they were beating and spitting on, I was sitting over there just boohooing. I mean, that'll bring you more to life than reading what actually watching. I don't know if any of it was false.
Yeah.
Looked all pretty much in line. I was just sitting over there boohooing like crazy.
The Passion. Yeah. It's tough to watch.
I have not seen it.
I've never seen it.
I-
They told me that I had to see it, and after we watched it, I said our boys need to watch it too. It's rough, but you don't know until the visuals of that movie they're different, and it'll change you the way you see the whole thing.
I watched it on Easter morning on the couch, and he was still, I guess, getting ready or whatever, but I'm in there I'm like, I can't get to it, look at me.
It'll make you cry.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's a tough one.
He did it so that, I mean, the world was sinful, and the only way that we could have righteousness with him was a sinless person had to die for our sin. And then, I don't know, and then we leave and go out into the world every week, and I still commit sin. I don't, I'm not sinless. He died for that, for me to, I don't know, the love that's there, right? The grace and mercy that he give us. All right, I'll keep going. Verse 21, a passerby named Simon, who was from Cyrene, was coming in from the court side. Just then, the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Jesus was so weak, I'm guessing he couldn't carry it anymore, right? And they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They offered him a wine drug with myrrh, but he refused it. And I from what I've watched this week, trying to study for this a little bit, the crucifixion itself was a traditional way of crucifying, right? There were certain things they did. They nailed their hands, they nailed their feet. They did the clothing, they ripped the clothing off. They divided that up. They offered them this almost, I think they called it almost like a sedative, right? This wine with myrrh to,
Like a painkiller.
yeah, it's kind of a painkiller. I mean, they knew what they were fixing to go through. But all these things were kind of a tradition for this crucifixion on the cross in that time. But Jesus refused to take it. Right? He didn't want he didn't want the painkiller. So then the soldiers nailed him to the cross, and they divided his clothes. And my Bible says 3 dice. I think it says cast lots. Mine's a men's Bible, so I guess it's referring to they divided it up to decide who would get each piece. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. A sign announced the charge against him, and it read, "King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries or thieves were crucified with him, one on the right and one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Ha, look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, then save yourself and come down from the cross." The leading priests and the teachers of the religious law also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, King of Israel, come down from the cross so we can see and believe him." Even the men who were crucified with Jesus ridiculed and mocked him. 3 hours later, at noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice. I can't say all that, but it means, my God, why have you abandoned me? Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a stick so he could drink. Wait, he said, let's see whether Elijah comes to take him down. Then Jesus uttered another loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the Roman officer who stood facing him saw how he had died, he exclaimed, "This man was truly the Son of God." Y'all, there ain't a lot I can add to that. There really ain't. I did highlight a few things in here, so we'll read through that. Verse 33, when it says darkness came over the whole land, so there was 3 hours into Jesus' crucifixion. The noon became darker than midnight. This darkness was not some natural event like a sandstorm that were common. It also could not have been a solar eclipse because the Passover occurs during a full moon. The darkness can only be explained as a supernatural act of God, the direct statement from Him to the people. The darkness lasted 3 hours and should have caused the Jews to reflect on the first Passover in Egypt. In the final plague before that Passover, darkness covered Egypt for 3 days. This was followed by the death of Egypt's firstborn child. Here, God's firstborn has given his life on the cross that everyone should embrace him as the Messiah and Savior. In verse 37, when it talks about his last breath, the commentary here says, with most crucifixions, the condemned would spend days on the cross before falling into a coma or actually dying. It says, however, Jesus demonstrated complete control over his death and his life. He was fully conscious when he cried out for the last time, indicating that he alone determined the timing of his death. Other gospel writers recorded that Jesus surrendered his spirit, indicating he knew when his mission was finished. In verse 38, where it talks about the curtain of the temple, I'm listening, and evidently there was many curtains in the temple, and this was the biggest, thickest, heaviest curtain that went into the holiest of the holy places that the chief priests could go. You know, they went to speak with God and cleanse themselves. But when this, I'll read it, and when this curtain torn, that was, from that point forward, we can pray to God. We can have that relationship with Him. There's no curtain there anymore. So at the moment Jesus died, there would have been priests serving in the temple. And those ministering would have seen this large, heavy curtain separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies. ripped from top to bottom. It says, no human could have torn this curtain by hand because of its thickness. As in addition, reaching the top and tearing down would have drawn attention, and ripping from top to bottom emphasizes that this was an act of God. It also signified that sacrifices at the temple were no longer necessary, and that Jesus had become the ultimate sacrifice and offered direct access to his Father, our Father. I ain't got nothing else. His word was what I read, and no matter who I watched or what I watched to kind of prepare, when I started from where we picked up last week and read to his last breath, that was all I needed. That time frame right there, and everything that was done. I'm sorry I don't have more. Do y'all have anything? Anybody?
Still, he was, in other places in Scripture, it said he come as like a lamb to the slaughter. And sheep don't say a lot, you know. They just sort of stand still, quiet.
They're very timid.
Talk about him not saying anything. It wasn't nothing for him to say. He said everything he could say. They ignored him the whole time. And so he was doing what he was supposed to do. And now you something you mentioned that I ain't never thought about is that he controlled when he took his last breath.
Yep.
Now I can't say I've given that a lot of thought before.
He didn't fall into a coma. He was not unconscious. He knew.
Because he's fully God, he created himself.
Yep.
He can control when he died.
He controlled that.
You know, I said a bunch of times to myself, and maybe a few times in our class, it took effort for him to not come off the cross.
Mm-hmm.
His inclination was always to save and to fix and to heal. And this time, the only way to do it was by staying on that cross.
So I didn't talk about this, and this is why I want y'all to talk, because you helped me remember some stuff that I did read, because I get up here and get so nervous and just bleh. But one part where I read, everybody mocking him, hey, bring yourself down. You said you could tear the temple down, you could rebuild it, show us. They said that was just one more chance for Satan to tempt Jesus, right? Just Satan was getting his last lick in right there on him again, to tempt him where he'd been tempted before. And,
Think about these folks that heard him say that stuff, and they lived long enough to see the temple come down. And he went back, oh man, I remember he said that.
I appreciate you reading the scriptures leading up to it as well, because
I don't read well. I prayed hard that I could say it slow enough and with enough emphasis to understand it, because the book of Mark's been good. Maybe I've just spent more time reading it than I have the other ones, but it's been great. I have enjoyed it.
when you do that, when you have that bigger picture, like most of the time we focus on just a few verses when we do our studies. When you have that bigger, like looking at a couple of full chapters, basically, you can see God at work. You can see the timing, that it's God's timing, that it's Christ's timing.
Yep.
This wasn't controlled by high priest. This wasn't controlled by Pilate. This was controlled by God.
Yep.
And when you look at that broad picture, you can see all the elements that Jesus chose this moment that he was going to say who he was. You know, they were coming up accusing him of all these different things that aren't true, but you ask him the question and he's ready to answer it. He said, I am.
Yep.
And then that was all it took. And then it was time to go to the cross, because he had told them flat out, yes, I am the Son of God. I am the King of the Jews.
That was another
More than
time.
He wouldn't come out. I mean, he would say it, but his time wasn't ready, and so he decided when all this happened. God decided when all this happened.
Yep.
And so I think it's cool to look at like,
That
I
whole-
appreciate that, the bigger,
the whole thing.
picture, to see that, because when you get focused on smaller elements, there's a lot to glean from those smaller elements. But just watching God at work when you see the big picture, really always love.
Yeah, because today's lesson was really just on him on the cross itself, and there was a lot that from last week to this week that it meant a lot to me, and I just wanted to read the whole thing. Part of it was I was not as prepared as I should have been. That's my fault, but there was a lot there that I wanted to read.
Mark, do you care if I read,
No, ma'am,
a little bit of that?
you do what you
This
want.
is like the narrative of the video. In order to speak, air must pass over the vocal cords during exhalation. The Gospels note that Jesus spoke 7 times from the cross. It is amazing that, despite his pain, he pushes up to say, "Forgive them." The difficulty surrounding exhalation leads to a slow form of suffocation. Carbon dioxide builds up in the blood, resulting in a high level of carbonic acid in the blood. This would have caused him to be really confused. Like when we don't exhale, we're holding carbon dioxide. It usually makes people super confused.
Delirious, yeah.
He's not delirious
Right.
in this situation, but let's see. The decreased oxygen causes damage to the tissues, and capillaries begin leaking watery fluid from the blood into the tissues, causing a buildup of fluid around the heart and lungs. The collapsing lungs, failing heart, dehydration, and inability to get oxygen essentially suffocates the victim. The decreased oxygen damages the heart itself, leads to cardiac arrest. In severe cases of cardiac stress, the heart can literally rupture. Jesus most likely died of a heart attack. After Jesus' death, the soldiers break the legs of the 2 criminals, but they didn't break Jesus' legs because he was already dead.
Yeah, I did read that. They did not break his legs.
Which is prophecy, correct?
Yeah, right. Not a bone would be broken.
So essentially, he was literally drowning.
And he shouldn't have been able to do what he was doing.
No, he shouldn't have been able to do that. But in order for him to even get a word out, he had to like push up on his feet, nailed, even to just say something because his lungs are full of fluid and blood. And then when they pierced his side, it says that blood, like literally fluid, which is blood and water around his heart and lungs. So not only did he have a heart attack, it says his heart ruptured, according to this, and he's drowning in his own blood.
But it still was not finished until he took his.
Yeah. Normal, we would not have even made it to that. We would have died.
Because he hung for 6 hours, right, before this, like before it was finished.
That would have, medically, seeing stuff at work like this doesn't, like, he's not normal. We know that already, but he's human, but he's supernatural human, but we couldn't.
We're not.
No,
His God's love for us. It's amazing. And
The Romans had perfected torture.
sir,
The Romans had perfected torture. That's why the Jewish leaders, they were just fine with letting Romans do this. They were kind of working together on this deal. But they would take guys and crucify them without doing all the beating that they put on Jesus too. And they would hang there for days. I think that's part of why his body went downhill as fast as it did. But at the same time, it's the timing. While this was happening, this Passover, there's thousands of lambs being
Coming through.
killed
Yep.
all around the city and in the city on the same day. So that's when John the Baptist says, "Here comes the
the
Lamb."
perfect.
Right.
Yeah, I had that screenshot on my phone. I had that.
He said, "Here comes the Lamb of God." He won't lie.
Yep. Yep.
I know sometimes I say, like when I'm talking to Blue, I'm like, "I love you so much, my heart could just burst." Well, Jesus' heart did burst because he loved us so much. That's just, we do not deserve it at all.
Mark, I believe we got a whole lot of pilots.
So my mind, me and Shannon spoke about this pilot. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Some of the reason I've done it, a big part of the reason he finally gave in to his crucifixion was he wanted to hold his statue within the community.
Yep.
And I wonder now if he had chosen what was right instead of what was the community wanted, expected of him, what would have been the outcome.
That's what's wrong with our governing world today. Yeah, me and Shannon spoke on that on Pilate because there again, my knowledge is not as what it should be, but he just stuck out to me, right? He knew Jesus wasn't guilty. He admitted it.
Tried his best to clear it.
Yeah,
Washing his hands.
yeah.
But he's still the one that said, so be it.
He had to hold his, he had to be the big man in his community for it was.
Did Jesus ever go to him after he like resurrected? Like, did he ever show his face to him again?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
I just wonder what his thoughts were when he was like, look what I did, or look what I didn't do. Rather.
There again, my knowledge is not as good as it should be, and I can't wait to read further. But all the disciples left him, right? That part just really stuck out to me too. They all had been following him, stay with him, And, hey, when they arrested him, they got gone, except for Peter. And
And the only one that was there when he was crucified was John.
was John?
That's the only one we know of that's in the scripture. But because John's standing there, and Jesus tells him about Mary, his mom, said, this is your mother, this is your son. So John, his disciple, the only one that I know that was there.
So where did they all go?
They all hiding out. But they were ready to crucify too.
Yeah.
And a lot of them did later.
Guys, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know about that, but I tell you what, you will definitely learn more if you're asked to do it. I need to study this hard every week. Life is busy, and I'm not making excuses. I don't take the time I should to study every week like I should.